Okay, that should be live. Make sure that I'm actually in focus, because yes, I am. Okay, so clean architecture. That's the focus of today's stream yet again. Not through any want to prolong this, but from a need. I have been working on this as well off stream. But my goal is one of making sure that I'm comfortable with how this is working, and I'm learning several things along the way that you know keep me moving along with this and keep me kind of focused on the end goal. So for the last couple of days, we've reorganized all this code into a bit of a hairball. We've reorganized all this code, and broken a lot of the tests because I've changed up how I'm thinking about things. I've changed up all manner of things. And yesterday, Asa shared with me that an example, having watched the stream and gone back and he'd done some actual extra work on trying to format some of these classes for me, and try and make them a little clearer, and it highlighted yet another hole. And the one thing I'm starting to realize is it doesn't matter how much I believe that there's only one way of doing this, or I think there's a nice easy pattern to fit in. There's going to be a case that fits somewhere else, or there's some other thing, or there's an interpretation of the rules. So when something feels painful, the challenge, the question is, am I putting it in the right place, right? Do I know? I don't think I do, right? So yesterday kind of went through, and I created a folder called use cases for now because I still want to figure out how this all fits in, because there is primary use cases that are driving this functionality, right? Registering the organization or registering the company. I kind of flip-flop on that name, and let's change that now. Organization name, right? Sorry, the dogs were chewing something and it fell off the couch. Let's change this here as well. Okay. So we change that in our parameters. Organization name. So we have a consistent API. So we have the concept of registering an organization, and registering an organization is multi-part, right? So in the workflow, right, this is now the workflow. I've dropped the word workflow from this because I'm starting to realize even this doesn't fit quite in neatly. Oh, and I need to test transaction scope. That's another thing I need to test. But in here, this works on several pieces, right? And each of these pieces comes together, and that becomes my organization. So I add an address, I associate it with a tenant, I create a tenant, I associate it with a tenant, I create a user, I associate it with a tenant, I register that user with the user provider, which in this case is Auth0, and I'm then done. But this makes for a very unreadable chunk of code. And now I have having run some unit tests, I have some holes, right? So I started to reorganize my tests a little bit, trying to narrow in on what I'm actually testing, where they're specific to this workflow versus non-specific. And then I got an email with a bunch of code, or a message with a bunch of code, and I started reviewing that, and I started looking at yet more inconsistency, right? So services, right? If we look at Amichai Mountain Man's code, which is labeled as by him as the ultimate clean architecture sample, right? We have our layers, right? So we have our domain, we have our application, we have our infrastructure, and our presentation. I assume this is kind of like shared kernel sort of thing. And our application has, commands and queries. And I'm seeing that his structure here follows more along my structure here, right? Where he's got those objects and then he's got the actual things underneath. And, he has a command and a handler, right? And this is all very nice and neat. But in his domain, there is no service that I can see, right? There's no example of what happens if you've got a complicated event or a complicated need. So I'm like, well, there's no example of it. So let's go back to Jason Taylor's. Does he have any concept of services in his domain, right? And I'm like, no, I can't find any examples in here. So I go to Ardalis's, and so he calls, his naming of everything is different than everybody else's, right? So core is his domain, right? And in here is services, delete contributor service, or delete contributor service, however we say it. And in reality, this is perfect because it demonstrates something, right? A delete. I can't make an entity delete itself, right? I can't say, okay, this entity, if I want to delete an address, delete can't be on here because it can't delete itself. What does it mean to delete itself, right? There's no actual thing there. Delete is something that is outside of the bounds of this specific entity. But it does work in terms of I've got to remove this. Kind of does live here in terms of behavior. So maybe a service in here does make sense, right? Because in this instance, what he's doing is going getting the entity, he's then deleting the entity using the repository, and then he's publishing the domain event that the entity was deleted. That domain event can't be published from anywhere else. So it kind of makes sense. So I started to realize that there's a lot of contradiction. Like the pattern is there for clean architecture, right? The structure is there. The dependencies are in the right order, kind of. But there's no one place where some behavior, right? We're getting away from domain logic, etc. There's no one place where that behavior necessarily exists cleanly, because stuff in the this is the application, right? This is the application services. See, even the word services, we've got the word in there, right? Stuff in here has a handler, and this will publish domain events, right? So it's not like there's a hard rule. If it publishes a domain event, it lives in the domain. No, it doesn't, right? And if you look at the dependency ordering, this kind of starts to make a bit more sense. So yeah, I'm like, okay, well, there was a problem I had yesterday that I was thinking about how do I get around, right? And that is the fact that my chair slides back and just hits the lip and throws me off ever so slightly. So I have a case where my address is weird, right? So I create an address, right? I actually commit this address and save it separately. And then I create my tenant, right? And I pass that address ID in. But why, right? Why do I do that? Well, I do that so that I can break these up into more logical pieces, right? Because these behaviors are easily testable now, right? And I can put an event on this entity, right? There is now an address created event just for the sake of publishing it. Again, I'm just kind of flexing that little piece, and we'll go into that later as to why I want to do that. But the reality is, in this instance, I don't need to create this address unless the tenant needs to be created. So what I've done is I've created an address, saved it to the database. The tenant doesn't need to be created. This conflicts, right, and throws out. So if I get this transaction working, then this would roll back and none of this would happen. So what do I do? Well, I don't want to create the address unless the tenant is due to be created. This address has no meaning beyond this tenant right now. There's no need for it to exist in the database independent of the tenant, right? Now it should be linked to the tenant. It shouldn't be a hard, tenant address record or whatever. It's an address record that has a tenant address linking record. I'm still good with that concept, but it still means that I have this behavior where there's two things together. Well, domain services look like that's the place for that, right? Because that's the dumping ground, right? It's the area where I can put things that are not quite cleanly fitting in an infrastructure service or a domain service or an application service rather. Right, so if I go into here and I have the delete contributor service, right? So let's follow that pattern is my idea, right? And proceed through this. So we're gonna have the create tenant service, right? Now this interface, where is it defined? Defined in the domain, right? I'm gonna stay with my normal naming, right? I create tenant service, and the beauty of this is now, okay, let me see if things build, right? That's the first step. I need to make sure things build so I can start from a clean slate here. They do, okay. So my tests, as they stand right there, I'm not going to panic about. We're just going to create a new project. This lives in tests. And this is tenant management.domain.tests. Right? This gives us a perfect opportunity to do this in a TDD style. I say style because I'm probably not going to conform necessarily. Okay. So we have another challenge here first. And I think it's okay because I think the domain takes the dependency in the right direction. I think this is naturally okay. No, it's not. Domain cannot know about application. Domain cannot know about application or infrastructure. We have this service, tenant search service. This interface exists in the application layer. This is necessary to do this job. And this is very much database dependent, right? So the application knows about the iTenant search. It knows it can ask, do you exist? It doesn't care about the implementation. It's not a domain service because it needs to know about the context. It's 100% an infrastructure service. But I can't take that dependency, even as an interface in here, because domain doesn't know about application. Oh, come on. This is determined to drive me crazy, isn't it? So, again, I'm asked the question, what am I doing wrong? No, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to get stuck. We are not going to get stuck. What we are going to do is when we're going to verify the events in here, in actual tests, responsible tests that are covering the pieces they need to cover. When tenant user is created, fact tenant user registered event is enqueued. Display name equals okay, let's add X unit to that. I'm going to put the demo, I'm going to put a sample test in there. Hi Asa, how are you doing? This is giving me some challenges, that's for certain. I'm not bad. I'm not bad. I'm questioning. I'm questioning the design. I understand the concepts. I understand what I'm looking at, and I'm not. I'm just finding that a lot of this stuff is kind of they hit that problem. They hit that problem. That's how they answered that question. And I'm unfortunately hitting those components because again, yeah. Define it in the iRepository T domain, then use infrastructure. For example, tenant search. Yeah, I'm starting to think I'm going to create a sample project that is focused on some of this. Private tenant user. That's an interesting result equals no. Result. Don't need that. We just need act result equals tenant user dot create user ID tenant ID. Yeah, I'm just gonna write this one test just to put these pieces in place, and then we're gonna go over that, I think. So I appreciate having you here. This is result dot domain events dot of yeah, that's how I did it. Assert dot not null. What do I like about this? If you're going to create a domain service within the domain project and use iRepository within the domain service, it must be within the iRepository T domain project. That's the least of my worries right this second, I think. I think there's a bigger challenge. Why do you think there should be? What am I going? Oh, that's why. I'm being stupid. I want to put this structure and make sure that it's going to run, and then I can move back. Now you're here. Run all. Yeah. I like this. I like putting that display name. It makes them so much more readable. So you put the display name on the fact and it makes a readable output. I just wish you could do it at this level because it would make for some really nice readable tests. I'm going to look into that, maybe, if it's possible, make something that does it. Okay, so right now, I don't need to do this. Just to be clear, I do have this, I believe, in a working state. I believe. I'm still not quite there. This needs to be .application.test, but we'll worry about that afterwards. So I've got some of the tests around, right? So what I did is register organization does everything. It creates the address, it creates the tenant, it does the associate, the address for the tenant, and everything else like that, right? So as individual commands, these work. But I don't know if you caught at the beginning, but what I was saying is, realistically, I don't want to create an address if the tenant doesn't need to be, if the tenant isn't being created, right? Because the tenant already exists or whatever, right? So there's no point in creating an address unless I need to. So, okay, so let's follow that pattern, right? We created a service in domain that does the two things because these two things now live together. But they take a dependency on tenant search. Tenant search lives in infrastructure because tenant search is very much bound to SQL DB, right? It has to be in here, right? There's no other place for this to sit. Hey, Dota. Kinda. Talking more about who owns what, who knows about what, and how contradictory and how made up as they go along this stuff is. Oh, it doesn't fit this nice clean rule that we came up with. Oh, let's just stick it there. And then let's not be consistent on how we do it. Like, I'm sure if I go through the book again, I do have the books, by the way. If I go through the book again, some of this might be more apparent. Well, I'm using tenant search. It's used in the application, right? So the contract exists in the application. The infrastructure owns the implementation of it, right? Which is an okay dependency in terms of ordering. That is not an illegal direction, right? Infrastructure does know about application, right? And So it can know about an interface and it can define something that the application needs, right? So infrastructure having the actual tenant search service makes sense. I separated my interfaces from my classes. In this instance, yes. Because this needs an implementation of that, but doesn't care about the implementation. The infrastructure gives it the implementation, right? And the dependency order is not broken there, right? The infrastructure is allowed to know about applications, so the infrastructure can implement things that the application needs. Kind of in its name, I think. So tenant search is not my problem. My problem is if I want to join the behavior of creating a tenant, I sometimes feel like I have a general disagreement with C# and interfaces. Okay. My view of when an interface is needed is a lot higher. I mean, the interface means I can test these without having an implementation, right? Because I can swap out the behavior. I can mock that behavior. So the interface is that's where all that comes in. It comes in DI, it comes in now. It's being able to say, I will give you an implementation. You do not need to care about what that implementation does and where it comes from. Because again, and that makes sense, because if I switch this out to use search in a different format, right? And tenants, the only reason I don't like sticking a name on the end of these things, right? I don't like it being called tenant search service. I really don't feel comfortable doing those sorts of things. Tenant search is not my problem. Tenant search is not the issue right now. I'm using tenant search. Tenant search is used inside of registering tenant, right? Because I use tenant search to say, does the tenant exist by name? If it does it exist by address as well as name? And if that exists, then we're creating a duplicate, right? Because we're trying to register the same tenant, the same company, same organization at the same address and calling it something new, right? So yeah, and that needs to be organization name. So tenant search is not my problem. My problem is that this code right now has to now pull the address and search the address, but I've already created the address. But I shouldn't have created the address because I've not validated that this tenant needs to be, or this organization needs to be completed. So my thought was, well, this is exactly why those domain services exist, right? They exist because when you need to do more than one thing, you just stick it in something else and put the label service on it, right? That's how you get around it. You get around this. So the idea of these is, and the guidance that most people offer, from what I can find, is a command handler should have one repository, and it should do one thing with that repository. It should not inject multiple repositories, and it should not do more than one thing. If you need more than one thing, you just whack in a service, right? I don't know why. And again, the guidance is do not use a command handler to send commands, right? A command handler should receive a command and that's it, which is why I created what I've currently labeled use cases just for kind of aligning my understanding. My workflow stuff, which is just literally mediator without mediator, right? That should be iSender as well. Where's the window? Right. It's mediator without mediator. So this workflow or this service, right? Actually, this is probably a service, right? Is doing the bulk of the work. But now I've got an address being created before I have an organization, before I have a registered tenant record. Well, that's not right because I don't need to do the address if the tenant doesn't need to be created. So I'm trying to get my head around how the heck you meant to design this software, because I can't create a domain service for this, because the domain service takes a dependency on tenant search, which is an implementation in infrastructure, and domain does not have knowledge of infrastructure. The stereotypes are kind of worthless without good definitions around them is there. Also, not claiming I have a good definition of what a service is. I don't think anybody does. This is where I am with this, right? I am frustrated, right? Because now I've committed to a point of I need to do some organization, but now if I deviate and anyone comes into the stream and watches this, I'm going to end up having to justify myself indefinitely if they feel any way strongly. So I'm okay with the discussion. And I do feel that doing this wasn't necessarily bad. But now I see the holes. So initially my concern was that my architecture was kind of forced upon me because of my usage patterns. But it doesn't, the problem is the interface doesn't exist there. Oh no. Oh. Something just dawned on me and it's still valid. Ugh. Hold on. I need to make sure I can keep an eye on the pops. They were rather playful this morning. I've been awake since 4 a.m. Okay. Right now, I have iTenant search existing application. No. I'm going to stick with contracts. I know that Ardalis uses the word, I think, again, if you look at all three examples here, there's no consistency. Ardalis has to put readmes to make sure that it aligns to clean architecture. So he's put his own spin on it. Amichai, Mountain Band. Amichai, has his own style, but doesn't even use services, right? I actually looked it up. I was like, okay, let's find out what this is, right? Including architecture. When do we use a domain service, right? Oh, we're not even going there. Let's not get me started on ports and adapters or Onion. I'm surprised you don't reference TED stuff because it's Java. No, I've never looked at TED stuff. And again, I program in the way I program, right? This is only because my stuff I have never actually finished the clean architecture book because again, I got frustrated with the opinions and the niceties, and I try and implement stuff and then find these struggles. And so my software has evolved to be, probably a mix of everything. Domain interface port, infrastructure implementation, it's adaptive use dependency inversion. I'm still mad about that book. For a clean architecture or clean code? High-level modules should not import anything from low-level modules. Both should depend on abstractions. Problem is, when you've got a big circle, what's high level? I'm not mad I bought any of those books. I'm not mad I buy any book. I am scared for newer developers, right? Because they have to relearn things over and over again. Right. And all we're doing is keep relearning these things and keep putting new badges on them. We're not actually changing anything And it's idealistic, right? It works for me. If I write a to-do application, right, which we are going to do, by the way, I know what I'm going to do for my my stretch my legs demonstration of this, right? If I write a to-do application, it's really easy to think about where things live. And I get it. These three people are not just to-do applications, right? They have to keep the sample simple enough that it can be picked up and looked at, but complicated enough that it demonstrates the concepts. And they're either purely written towards Uncle Bob's guidance, which I would say I accept 50% of what he says, right? Some of it's idealistic, some of it's good guidance. So, but it's a case of like, oh, this doesn't fit. Oh, how can we make it fit and still have the things in the right order? Oh, yeah, we'll just stick it there. Right. So if I put that there, right? Is this still legal? It will be legal right now because the namespace hasn't changed. Let's refactor it. So one of the things you've got to be careful of here is that you don't, because of the tooling will often include references. So you've got to be very careful that you don't, when you move something around, that you don't actually let it import a reference, because you could actually import a dependency in the wrong direction. I sort of disagree with you. And this is the problem, right? We there is no one way. And that's my worry. My worry was that basically by following this, I would be stuck doing it in one way of doing it. And in reality, I'm not. So this fixes my problem, because now tenant management. So does that? No, that doesn't exist there. Well, that might do. No, I don't think anyone does. And I think the challenge is, as a newer developer, you come to look at a code base like this and it's baffling and it's mind-blowing and there's so much to take in. So how do you get good at this stuff? If there's a billion different opinions about what's the right way, right? If you start looking up software architecture, right, what is the way? My take on service. So let's do this. So I think we covered it yesterday. Is your still there? Okay. Okay. So you have domain, infrastructure, their essential presentation, right? Domain services, expense service. Well, you call the infrastructure different. Okay. Now, what were you trying to follow? You were doing ports and adapters here, or you were following TED stuff? Hexagonal, a C# take on TEDs. Okay. Right. But again, that's the thing, right? you take the things you like, and then you find a challenge that the architecture doesn't necessarily present itself to you as having an answer for, right? And you then go and say, okay, well, here's how I'm going to achieve it. And it's either right or wrong, but it works. And that's kind of my point all along, right? It's not that there's a pure way of doing this, right? There's some clear benefits to doing it in certain ways, right? And I can definitely see that in this structure now, right? Now I see the odd. So my dependencies kind of went all the way up, right? My application style was definitely kind of N tier, right? It was not. It blended some of these concepts, but it really was A to B to C to D in terms of dependencies, right? There was data, there was application, there was presentation. What we've done is kind of split that out a little bit, right? And in the name of protecting the things that you need to protect and organizing the things you need to organize and kind of categorizing things a little bit cleaner. But again, I'm going to come up against use cases that don't necessarily fit, and that's the challenge. And new developers, I've always said, right, that the most important thing is making sure everybody's comfortable in a code base. If I walk away, let's say I build a business around this, right? Let's say this is a product and there's 10 of these sorts of things around, right? Because this is going to change again, right? This will be different in the future. So we know at least 3. There's more services. A newer developer comes onto the project. They have to solve a problem, right? They don't know about all this architecture stuff. They just know that there's a pattern. No worries. How do they work in it, right? Same thing. You're working in this. Someone else comes along and works in it. How do they work in it effectively with you, right? Without that expertise, without that, you know, I should update it for some reason. Obvious refactoring, naming in particular is messy. That names you do that namespacing thing that triggers me. This is what I was saying today when you had a nested thing and you ended up with domain dot thing and you didn't see a problem, and I was like, oh, that's why you don't see a problem, because you've got the namespace there. That is an expense report, right? That's what I was talking about. I knew that we were going to end up doing this, so it was triggering me a little bit. Yeah, expense report is a domain object. Yeah, yeah, right. Used internally by domain. Huh. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, just from a readability perspective, these are kind of magic numbers. Is kind of just my, like, it's hard to, you have to go and look at the code and understand why that is that value, right? Or you have to understand the logic there. And if you have to change that, yeah, yeah. So it's just if you're writing the tests around that, then it helps you if you can explain what those values mean. What is over expensed, right? but that's the balance between knowing the domain and being able to understand. Yeah, that's an overexpense, right? Because we know that an overexpense is X value or whatever. In reality, what you might have is a service that's injected to provide those values so that those values are not arbitrary, and then you can control them and say, okay, over expenses if it's over this value, so you can kind of say it. Yeah. But anyway, let's jump back to this. Right. But and this all comes back around that domain-driven design concept, right? Is I'm exploring the domain here, right? I changed registered tenant to be registered organization, right? Because it dawned on me that it's not just a tenant is an internal concept, right? I'm asking those questions of myself and I'm trying to challenge myself. This I will test eventually, right? I'm leaving it in there for right a second because I'm concerned. But you don't know what you don't know. So the measure is, what I want to do is kind of come up with a set of questions that I have to ask myself. If I'm implementing something new, right, what are those questions? Right? Does it have X dependency? Does it need X thing? Right? Does it is this value passed in? Do I need to know about this beforehand? There's got to be a set of questions I can ask myself as kind of a checklist before I create something to say, okay, this lives there, right? Code it quick, TDD SQLite. This is your new stuff? Yeah. REPL. Yeah. Move this into its own class. Right. And that's a completely valid way of developing, right? There's no issue with that development. The problem you've got to be careful of is if you're doing that for real, you've got to make sure that you do these things before you say the code is done, right? So, yeah. Right, but and that's kind of pattern discovery stuff, right? That's the way that goes. So, yeah. Do I deal with this now? Yeah. Do I keep doing my thing and change it later? Yeah. I mean, and I think he chose the right path because you're exploring this a lot more, and you can go back and refactor some of that stuff and clean it up in line as you go, which means that the final version looks a lot neater than it would have done. Because if you just cut and paste it out, then maybe it's not perfect, or maybe it's got more changes to do. Maybe there's extra tests you need to wrap around. No, it's a perfectly valid way of developing. Okay. The other advantage is delaying it. So this is now I'm going to call this a service. I don't like calling it a service, but I don't think it's valid because it doesn't. When it comes to commands, right? I like this style, right? That's just my preference, right? This does a thing. If someone says, "Hey, could you go into where we register the tenant," right? Oh, where we register the address. That said, putting smells in your code is clearly not good. It's more obvious as a smell. That said, putting smells in your code is clearly not good. Let's rewrite that expense reporting thing. I don't agree with the structure. I mean, that's growth, right? That's why I write so much code. That's why I don't mind failing on a project, is because every project you do comes with some learning, right? I've been lucky enough. ESSA has spent a lot of time, you know, giving us extra resources, giving us extra learning pieces that maybe we wouldn't have found, or more, we wouldn't have found, or I wouldn't have found on my own, right? Taking the time to look through the code and say, here's how you should do this, or here's how you could do this, right? And here's my opinions on this, and engaging in that active discussion, right? That is useful in a job environment, right? You really want your team to be engaged, right? You don't want to be, here's how to do this. You never want to be that way, because then what will happen is if the team just goes off and does what you tell them to do, they're going to be not necessarily destructive, but they'll be, and I use this term with my dog all the time, maliciously compliant. He'll jump up on you, right? And he's now over 50 pounds. He'll jump up on you, and if you've got like a snack or something, and he'll try and get a snack, he's like, no, sit, get down and sit. He'll do the sit part, but he'll sit on you. So he'll sit down in your lap so you can't eat the thing. He's sitting, he's doing what he's been told to do, but he's being maliciously compliant, right? And developers will often do that. If they're told they have to follow a pattern or should follow a pattern, they'll follow it to the destructive end. They'll make sure it works no matter what, and your code base will suffer for that. So it's really good to have engaging conversation and to keep growing and learning and iterating over what you've done, and not just saying it's done, right? The database project to go is different. I want to finish the thing. Yeah, we are very lucky to have ESSA in the stream, as yet another voice that has good, solid opinions and experience on this stuff as well. Not just someone who's read it all and says, here you go, here's how to do it. You know, and again, like, your experiences, they shape you, and they are then able to share that knowledge with other people, and you can say, oh, I like this, I don't like this, here's how we differ, and provide a different insight, a different aspect. So it's very useful. Okay, so I'm thinking what happens is register tenant goes away. I think that register tenant service takes the dependencies that happen now and it creates the right things. And Esther, if you're still watching, if you're still paying attention, feel free if you disagree with how I'm about to do this. I'd be interested to know if you still think I'm on track with what I'm doing here. Because this behavior is one definitely of, I need these two things to happen. I wonder if you would benefit from two projects. Oh, that's a lot of work. So I have a small application, right? That I'm thinking that I might build in this style and see if we can, and then share that code base so others can actually tinker with it. So it's kind of like a to-do application. So I'm not going to label it as a clean architecture thing. No, the expense report project is one that I would do, though. I have a fun little project I want to do as well. So many different things. I've got to pick. Yeah. So the project I have in mind is kind of a reminder application, right? That I could grow in, or could be taken off in different directions. My daughter and I were talking yesterday. We're both guilty of not drinking enough water, right? So I kind of wanted to make an application to remind us both to do it. So there's a little bit of of complexity involved in that, but it's also but it kind of hits that point, right, of an application that I can build on stream that is visible to everybody. The code base is visible and the opinions are there. Maybe I don't dedicate all the time because I still want to get this done, right? This is still my primary focus. So once I get this structure in place, my intention is to get back on track with writing code. But maybe I take a couple of days a week and do some architecture stuff and leave my challenges in there. And if I struggle with something, go and implement something in there. And that stuff is easy to move around and get credit. The correct project is natural less work anyways, yeah. So it's more a case of this is getting larger, right? This application, it doesn't look like it right now, but there's a lot of time spent in here, right? There's a lot of code. And if I keep changing my mind on the way things are done, I'm never going to finish this, right? So I have to kind of commit to something. So I'm generally comfortable with the structure right this second. This we'll get around to, right? This is just a folder organization thing. And again, I'm looking at other people, right? How they organize, how they, not that one. Especially C#, right? How do you organize this, right? And I know that yours isn't clean. I'm just clean architecture. I know that it's different, but it's, again, what do you name things? How do you structure things? Do you think purely in one way, or do you think in a different way, right? These kind of follow that Uncle Bob concept in terms of, the naming is the thing you're talking about, but then you go technical anyway, right? For structuring purposes, right? Delete reminder, right? I really feel that's so this isn't a waste because you've got the folder there, right? But if you just had delete reminder as a command underneath commands, then you don't have the folder or the object. So the readability is right there. And a handle is never going to do a query and a command. So, reviewing how people do things, I think is definitely helpful. I think that the way this is structured now, if someone had worked in a clean architecture before, hi, Connie. Good day. How are you? They would be able to adjust. But I don't think there's any pure way of doing it is kind of where I'm going there. So, yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take register. Right, we're going to take the pure form of that. We're going to need this address data again, right? So the challenge here is this is going to need a let's just go with task for right now. We don't have a result. Register tenant async. That's pretty astute of you. Sublocality, city, town, or village, state, province, a region, postal code, and country ISO. There you go. Take care, Dota. Thank you as always. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for hanging out. Been fun. Have a great day at work. So let's go with this for right now. Going to be clear. So this is registering the actual tenant record for this organization, right? An organization is more than just the tenant and the address. It's the users. It's everything else. So this is an I register tenant service, and it implements that. I really wish it would do this for me. I know it adds a lot of padding to the top and a lot of spacing, but it does increase the readability of the fact that here's the information that you're going to pass in. You know, I'd say I watched Mr. Anhorn code for a long time, and everything started to be columnar like this and didn't float across the screen. And I kind of used to kind of group these, like I'd have these three up here, then these three down here, then these, and then I realized that this is so much more readable. And now I'll look at people and I'm realizing that's actually quite common. I don't know whether that's a side effect of other languages or not, but yeah. So in here, we're going to do this, right? So we need an iTenant search in here. And we don't need the address repository now. Can I do? Yes, I can. Why can I do that? Why does this have a dependency? Shared kernel, which has repository. So this can access repositories properly, which is fine. So I need a repository, and this is why this is a service, right? Tenant search. Again, we're going to do this tenant search. We need a tenant repository because we're going to have to create the tenant, right? And we're going to need an I repository of address and an I repository of tenant address. Although actually, if we do this right, what happens if we do this? Public virtual I collection address. No, tenant address. Public void associate address int address ID. I'm jumping beyond here. So that's kind of where we probably want to head, because then we can write this in a meaningful way, and we don't then have to actually reference anything other than these two repositories, and the rest of the logic is taken care of by the actual implementation. And the domain is dealing with the things it needs to deal with, right? I'm putting that responsibility in the right place, I suppose. So let's go and do some of this, right? So if await tenant search so I'm back. Okay, good progress. I think so. I think I'm starting to understand how this programming thing works. You know, it's taken me a while, like 25 years, but I think I know how coding works now. I'm sure that in about 10 minutes I'm going to be questioning my existence again. But this does start to feel... Zeus, hello. My apologies for not seeing... I really wish there was a way of putting like a blink or something on YouTube chat, because it's so tiny. My apologies if I didn't notice the message sooner. I hope you're well. Can I do... There we go. That's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to increase the font size so I see it quicker. So for anyone joining, I am building an application. I'm more than happy to stop and discuss it if you're interested in knowing more details. The purpose of the stream is not one of productivity; it is one of primarily growth. So I don't care if it's through discussion or whether it's through actual coding. I prefer to just write code and discuss it and get better at it. Even though I've been doing it quite a while, right? So let's do this. So I think if I'm being real here, this returns a result. I'm okay with that returning a result. That's not a bad dependency. And again, the tooling here you've got to be careful of because it can hurt you as much as it can help you. Result.conf error. Right. So the goal of this part is in this register organization now, which is essentially a handler, if I'm being honest. We inject the iRegister tenant service. Register tenant service. And then this code here goes away. That replaces it. Thank you, Copilot. Okay. So no reference, sublocality and state, province, or region can be null. And line 2 can be null. On which project you're working? Right now I'm working on an Agile project management tool of my own design. Think Jira as the biggest analogous project. Basically, I believe that there are some things that could be done differently, and I'm attempting to build my own version. Right now, we are in the midst of a bit of a refactoring in that I kind of changed my path to align a little bit more with clean architecture. Not really something that I was planning on doing, but it was more a realization that if I was going to use certain tools, then aligning with that architecture style would be beneficial. So refactoring to do that is coming to hopefully a close. So far, we kind of have the whole registering a new company and being able to add tickets and whatnot working. So yeah, it's coming together. And address line 2 can be null. So what I'm doing right this second is I am kind of splitting out some behavior into more logical components to try and better organize the system as a whole. So this gets a little smaller, but we're gonna need some information back from this. So this result is not going to be final. So this application, as it stands, just to be clear, the code is not available for this. Little projects I work on along the way, little pieces I work on. So this uses Kafka, it uses SQL Server, it uses, it has got pieces for API gateways in here. How many languages do you know? I mean, I'm primarily a C# developer. I assume you mean programming languages. I don't know any other languages other than English. I work as a PHP developer. I wouldn't say I'm the best at PHP because it has changed so much. I've used a lot of different languages. I don't feel that the language is necessarily a problem. One of the ones I do like using is Flutter, or rather Dart. I do like building apps in Flutter. I think mainly the biggest challenge when working with any language is your comfort with it. A significant portion of devs are only coding proficiently in 2 to 3 languages at a time. Think some backend, JavaScript, SQL. That should be at work. Okay, come for real. Okay, Tota. Thank you for popping in with that. I appreciate it. Have fun. So, it's what language are you using, Zeus? Or rather, I suppose, I'll ask a question. How far in your journey are you as a developer? And also being that I've been looking at these stats on YouTube, so I am getting subscribers on YouTube, which I really do appreciate. Thank you. The numbers are climbing, but the things that people are finding my videos by are kind of interesting. Things that I've never tagged them as. They're popping up as a lot of Kafka, a lot of Kafka. We'll get around on that. Okay, so that's the replacement for this. We'll obviously get some feedback from that in a second. So essentially what this is going to do is what this code out should do, right? But first we need to test this. So we don't need addresses null. What we need to do here is say, okay, well, before we even bother creating an address, let's test to see if this organization name exists. I've got to really think about those names. I'm wildly inconsistent on them things. Yeah, okay, I didn't even know those things there. So if this address exists, this tenant exists, sorry, little fly. Pause. First, does it exist with a name? If it does it exist with the address? So if I'm registering Smith Plumbing LLC and there's another Smith Plumbing, that's okay. But if I enter the same exact address, that's not okay, right? So my result should reflect that. And that's going to be organization name. And that's going to be organization. Already exists, right? So it's not a fatal problem if I'm naming something the same, as long as I'm giving it a different address. So now I can proceed with the next piece. And it's funny, the more I'm doing this, that railway-oriented programming, I think I'm going to do an investigation on how to do that in .NET, because it starts to become more fascinating, because I'm seeing the number of times I'm doing the if fail, if fail, if fail. It's very obvious that is a clear pattern. I suppose that comes back around on the functional piece again. Okay, so now we're gonna register the tenant. So these pieces come out, right? This comes out of here, right? Register the tenant service now does this, right? So that's organization name, and that's tenant repository. Add async. So now we have a tenant. Now we delete that. I've pulled the pieces out. I don't want to leave it lying around. There's no benefit in having it there. I don't care, right? And by the way, I haven't committed this in 2 days, so I am in a bad shape if I want to undo anything. So I am all in on this refactor. So now we need to register the address, right? And that looks like this. Let's see how aligned that is. Not far. Address, town, or city. See, I keep flipping that, and that's not healthy. So we're going to create an address. We create a tenant. We're going to create an address, and then I think that works. The ordering is going to matter here. So, because of the way entity framework works, address is not going to get assigned an ID until I save it. So that add async there in the repositories. Sorry, I'm realizing my hands are. I am a hand talker, and I'm realizing that my hands are right in front of the camera. The address repository will save changes when I hit address add async. That will save changes, which will allocate an ID to that address, right? Transaction rollback, whole different problem, right? Which then means that I can successfully add that address to the tenant. So I think what needs to happen is the address needs to get created first, this is amusing because I'm trying to avoid this exact problem, but this saves me because if I can wrap this in a transaction, then this would roll back as one transaction. So that's safe. Right now, I had just removed all this code to do this because these two are irreparably they're intertwined. But my point was not to create the address first, but yeah. So I think that works. Public void. Let's call it associate address. Because that's what I'm doing. I'm associating the address with this tenant in address. Let's just go with address. Right. And then we're going to say tenant addresses. We have to do some stuff with the collections there. Dot add new tenant address. That might work. Virtual memo call in constructor. Yeah, that's not healthy. That's virtual because it's an association. It's a navigational property. So it looks like the number of viewers has increased a little bit in the last couple of minutes. If you're new to the stream, feel free to ask any questions if you'd like. My focus is not necessarily on productivity. It's more about my learning and growth, and everybody else's. If they can get something from the stream, that's awesome. If you're just looking to support, I appreciate that as well. I do have a YouTube channel, which I am also streaming to. fine there. I gotta get better with the stream bit stuff. And yeah, it's so my brain's worrying on this. Sorry. Starting to wonder if I do have some sort of attention issues. But I realize it's important to make sure that as people come into the stream, that you understand that I'm not just programming so someone could sit and watch me program. I am sat here because I'm happy to talk about this stuff. I'm happy to grow. I'm happy to learn. So don't feel that if you ask a question that I'm going to shoot it down anyway. I don't mind backseating if you feel that that's productive. So if you feel you do know how I'm doing something wrong, I'm more than happy to sit and entertain discussion. So anyway, that should be my registered tenant service, right? Because that is registering a tenant. If I'm saying that a tenant, again, if I'm saying that a tenant has to be checked against its address, then registering the address at the same time as the tenant makes sense, right? What this gives us is the ability, we can now say tenant address was associated, right? I could publish an event, and I'm kind of using these as an experiment, by the way, so I'm adding events that I don't necessarily need, which is not good practice. But I could say tenant identifier, address does not have an identifier because address is not a domain, is not a necessarily public object. That feels really janky, but we'll find out. But that does mean that I can do something like that, right? Because I can say the tenant, right? I can say, yeah, that'll work. Those are init parameters, basically. That's starting to look okay. So now I have a mess, because what I've just done is I've kind of broken. I'm not doing TDD around that, right? I wanted to restructure that. Let's see if the app builds still. I don't think it does. I can see some red squiggles as is. Okay, so register address goes away. Register organization, why are you broken? Oh, you're broken because we're not returning a result. We'll get back to that in a second, right? Tests are going to be back all over the floor because I actually just spent time when registering an address, right? I just spent time doing this, and now I've just deleted that, so that test goes away. When associating an address with a tenant, right? Well, guess what? We don't do that anymore, so that needs to go away. Oh, this is starting to do something interesting, isn't it? Huh. So ads. Just trying to win that battle of when do I who do I upset and when? When tenant doesn't exist by name and registering a tenant, this is going to be interesting. So we're just going to delete that. We don't need them. Okay, we've just significantly decimated. Okay, we just decimated our tests. But that's okay. That is perfectly fine, right? Because the benefit is the code is starting to take a little bit of a cleaner shape, and things are starting to look better. So what should this return? Well, this should probably return the tenant ID, right? So let's make this a result of int, right? Let's go in the interface, make that a result of int, right? And in here we are going to do return result dot success tenant dot ID. Okay, so back in our register organization, this returns an int. If tenant dot if not is success, return result dot conflict. Right. I'm not specifying why there because that goes up to the presentation layer. The presentation layer doesn't necessarily need to care about that right now, as I have no output requirement. So I'm not worrying about that part. So what I have right now is some inconsistent patterns, right? This is a little bit different, but the same, because essentially this is like the address and the tenant, right? This is another association. But then I go on to do this, right? I do register user with provider, right? Which is an actual command. So register user with provider are fine. Associate user with tenant is fine. I could flip this a little bit though, right? And there is some stuff there that I need to make sure is handled, because I now have a configuration that says that a tenant user is associated with a tenant. A tenant user has a user and a tenant has a tenant address, etc. So, so I could do another collection like that and repeat the same pattern, which would give me some greater control over the eventing. So the one thing that starts to appear here to me is that this opens up a world where I can actually instrument my application in a really non-destructive way, right? And this is where it gets really appealing. I could put, because these are domain events, right? These are events that actually are underneath notifications in Mediator, right? So what happens is when I save and they commit the object to the database, they publish the domain events. Those domain events, I can subscribe to in here, right? I could actually put behaviors inside a Mediator that watch for domain events, right? And then record them. So now I can say these things happen in the system without ever actually touching the code. I don't actually have to publish anything specific in any event. I can just listen to all events being published. So just purely by putting the events in place, I'm actually improving the ability for my application to kind of be metricized. I can measure rates. I can do all sorts of stuff without actually touching the core code. So these are concepts that up until now I've generally struggled with because my normal format of coding doesn't gel with that. So I am really happy I went down this path overall. If a little, I really want to tear my hair out. It was worth the exploration so far. Okay, so now we have Kishan, how are you doing? I'm good. It is Wednesday. We are halfway through the week. It's going to make it a couple more days and it's a weekend again. No, I'm enjoying. I'm very much enjoying my development recently. So this is great that I'm getting this chance to reflect on this. So um, yeah. So for those joining, I will be actually. I was talking about it before. So obviously this code is not open sourced, right? I've no intention of open sourcing this because this is something I would like to turn into a project, into a product, right? So I do want to treat it very much like that. However, what this has raised is that I have some challenges with the overall architecture, and I need a playpen with which to work that is going to be a little less damaging if I kind of experiment with, because once I move forward of this, the next step for this application is I need to be able to then promote tickets from tickets to planning items, right? So there's a whole lot of code that I'm going to have to do soon on this. I cannot afford to keep flipping the architecture or introducing new concepts and rewiring everything time and time again. So I need to avoid that risk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an application. And I actually did prepare it, and I didn't show it earlier on. That's naughty me. So I kind of documented this out last night. Water, drink water, right? This is a kind of Sotolix, who streams game dev. His bot reminds him to drink water, and it's like, water, drink water. So this was kind of a play on that. But basically, my daughter and I both need to get better at drinking water throughout the day. We both need to be more regimented about it and kind of hold each other accountable, because I'm telling her to drink water and she's like, well, you didn't drink any water. So it serves a couple of purposes. I have a direct goal. I have it's a relatively simple to do / reminder concept, but it could grow beyond those pieces and it could be added to, right? It can be UI focused from the beginning, so I don't have to, right? With this application, I'm not UI focused. I'm very much API focused for a reason, because the UI will bog me down, right? So I'm actually gonna build this on stream. I don't think I'll dedicate every single day to it, but it is a way of doing exactly what I'm doing here. So there'll be no difference in. I will build it with this clean architecture style from the beginning this time, rather than my style, which I then realized needed some adaptation. Which I'm lucky that my style had evolved to the point where it had, because that wasn't a drastic change. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna put that up, and I'm gonna put it. So a long time ago, when I first started streaming, I created an organization group inside of inside of GitHub that is not my regular GitHub, and stream projects we worked on in the past were all put up here, right? So these are ones from the past, right? We did some recreations of Mediator. We did I did some game trove stuff in there, some Kafka sample stuff. We did some demonstrations for people. To-do list. We branched off of Junicus's stuff. So we've done all sorts of different things in this repository. You can see over the years it got put in there. But I created Water Drink Water as a project in here. So I will start streaming some of this using that application as a demonstration. So we'll start building that on stream probably next week. But yeah, that's the goal there. So yeah. But anyway, that diverts me long enough to get back onto this. So the tenant has builder dot. I dislike creating navigation properties. Has many. This always drives me crazy. TT dot tenant addresses dot with many. AA dot. No, it's with one. A dot tenant dot has principal key ID. That's foreign key. Navigation properties are something that I always feel that I have a handle on, and then I get them wrong and end up tinkering with. So I think I still need to define that. I don't think it's going to infer it cleanly. It could do because it's called tenant ID on the tenant address record, and it has ID as the primary key on this record. By default, it's an implicit kind of behavior. But we'll see. Right. So what else do I need to do? Well, I need to write some unit tests. But if this builds, I'm tempted to run it. Okay. I'm going to run it. If this comes back with message, this is amazing. What? Oh, some services. That makes sense. Kind of need to define some things, don't you? Builder.services.add transient. I register tenant service. Register tenant service. So I'm only starting that project. Use cases. Oh. There's no registration for that use case. Did I create something for that? Ah, there we go. Oh. Yeah, that's gonna be a challenge as well. So the entire reason for this complete overhaul, even after the fact I'd reorganized the code, was this one thing, right? I had this initially calling the same command that the tenant user was created from, but again, I need to associate. So this register new user is to create user and associate with tenant, etc. So, and then Welcome back, Zeus. So that was the entire purpose, right? That was not working as intended because I've refactored everything and moved everything around. Now, what I have achieved here is I've moved it back to the point where the registration of the user happens in my system so that I'm able to use my identifier to register with auth0, which means that the ticketing system still functions as expected. I don't have to share any sort of weird identifiers or kind of pass them around in the messages. I can now just proceed as I did. Let's see if this runs. So a few DI issues, right? It looks like it's running. I don't expect it to succeed. Associate address. Ouch, it got in there. Okay, the test there is actually, did it register the address? It didn't. Ooh, that transaction might have actually worked. That would be very good if it did. So the reason I suspect that is because if you look, we called create on the address, right? This saves changes, right? If I take, actually, let's test that once more. We're going to test it just to learn the behavior here. So in the application, in the use cases, when a registered organization, I wrap this in a transaction. Let's comment that out, right? Because what happens is that register address saves changes and then goes to do the tenant, right? So now when this fails, I should have an address in there created today, which isn't too damaging. It's fine. But for the purpose of learning that that transaction is actually effective, that's good news. Because it means if any part of this fails, the process rolls back. So if we do that again, we're going to get the error still, right? But now do we have an address? We do. It works. The transaction works. Nice. And why is that important from this scale? Well, because now if any one component of this fails, all the data for that registration is gone. There's no events fired. We'll verify that in a second. I think there's no events fired. We're going to have to look into that. But again, that's part of the testing. So, but that does mean that rolled back effectively. So let's go back to our registered tenant service. Now, I'm hopping all over the place a little bit here. Concerning register tenant service, when tenant does not exist with name. Fact, stop running actually. Fact, no, the stream is a little bit lagging from time to time, probably because you started the stuff. It's lagging? I use two PCs, so the stream should not lag. Am I seeing a drop frames? 0 drop frames. Mr. Anholm was having issues last night with Camlink, rather the camera manager, that was causing some stuttering on his stream. Doesn't look like I'm suffering that problem. Oh, but I just saw that. I saw that pause then. Is it the camera that's lagging or me? Yeah, OBS is reporting 0 drop frames on my side, but I'm looking down at the preview window and I'm seeing my camera is not always stable, maybe. But yeah, we'll see. If anyone else is getting any problems, I'd appreciate if you could let me know, because I would hate to feel the streams having problems. OBS, everything looks clean. So no. The joys of streaming, you don't know whether things are running smoothly or not unless someone tells you, so feel free. It's not an issue. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write some quick tests around this piece before we call this today, just to make sure that I've got some form of backup for the behavior. I don't expect I'm going to find the problem, because I think the actual problem is different than what I expect. So rather than go and look at the code and try and fix it, I'm going to write the unit test to prove it, and then see. So when tenant does not exist with name, address is created, right? And I'm changing my style here a little bit. I like this. Address is created. This makes more readable testing stuff. It will actually display like that. You can change some settings inside of XUnit to replace underscores, but yeah. Fact tenant is created, and fact address is associated with tenant. And I think I know what's going wrong, right? I think everyone should know what's going wrong if you've paid attention to what I'm doing. There's a key piece I missed earlier on. And it should still fail. Okay, so we need a subject, which in this case is our register tenant service, an actual interesting. An actual. What did you do? This is going to be an arrange act. So arrange act is just my pattern. It's a base class that I've created that has two methods, arrange and act. I do not like having arrange, act, assert inside of each test. I kind of prefer having the arrange and the act outside of them, and the tests being descriptive as to what they actually are, rather than actually having it all bundled in there. It means that each set of unit tests is very specific to a case, so hence my naming. When the tenant does not exist with the name, that's the configuration I'm doing, right? If it does exist by name, but doesn't match an address, right? These things are still true. So I will write tests explicitly for them. So our subject needs to be registered, and that requires a tenant search and a tenant repository, right? So we're going to create a public tenant search, and a public repository of tenant repository, and right, is it 3 dependencies? An address repository, yes. Okay, so we need our tenant search. Now this is a mock. This is not an actual implementation. As is our repositories, as are our repositories as well. So we have our tenant repository equals and address repository was that. I'm being lazy and letting Copilot do what it needs to do. So we inject our services, tenant search. And then our act is subject.register tenant async. And then we're going to create some variables up here. Public const string organization name equals organization name. Public. Yeah. 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 Yep, I'll do. Cancellation token dot none. Actually, I don't think I did that, did I? I don't think I passed in cancellation token. We're going to change the signature in a second. Get result. Did I? Oh yeah, I did. Okay. I'm better than I thought I was. Good morning, Apex. How was the stream? It's going well. We have a lot of refactoring done. Just kind of organizing the code a little bit more and adding some tests in here. So we've just kind of moved some behavior into a service, into a domain service, because there's kind of more involved with that than just one thing. Tunicus, hello, happy new year. How's it going? All doing good. Nice. How was your holidays? Okay. So, still going. Nice. So, what we need to do. Yeah, that'll do. Yep, that'll do. Ooh, almost. Puerto Rico has some of the longest holidays. Yeah. Puerto Rico's on is on my list of places that I would probably consider retiring to. I do like it there. Although I think I'd be about 50 pounds heavier. I like long holidays. Okay, let's see if we can finish this up. So, what we need to do here is we need to capture the tenant when we actually have it, right? Private tenant. It's not the result though. This is a little bit messy. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe this isn't as bad as that. So nice. Yeah, we celebrate starting on Thanksgiving, the next month, then New Year's, then Three Kings Day, and then we do something called the Ocata Vitas. So still 2 celebrations to go. Nice. Yeah, my wife is she does a culture class now, and she's introducing the kids to the Three Kings Day and getting them all little gifts and giving them the shoes thing and all sorts. So I don't fully understand that, but yeah, she's getting a lot out of them with the culture. Dogs are still behaving. We're still in good time. Okay, so how am I going to capture this? So it seems bad to capture that um the tenant was, so I could intercept the tenant from the ad and use that as a kind of intercept. Well, yeah, as far as I know, it's put grass in a shoebox for the camels at the Three Kings, right? Yeah, she puts all the gifts. She goes and gets all the gifts for them all, and then when they come in class in the morning, they go to their shoes and check their shoes and find gifts in them. So she kind of makes it kind of fun for them. These are teenagers, by the way. These are not little kids, but they still engage really well with this stuff. So I think I can do when let's name it properly, repository gifts are gifts. Yeah. Add async arg that is tenant right. Do look, I'm gonna start my stream for the morning. Thanks for streaming today. Glad I caught some of it. Nice, thank you, Apex. I will be along shortly. How are you detecting tenants? Detecting? Not sure I follow. Oh wow. Oh, okay. So right now my plan for this is basically when you log in, um you are I store the tenant in your app token, so it's a GUID. And when you come into the application, everything is a request gets passed down with the tenant ID that you're doing it as. So it's a claim, essentially. Oh no, actually, not essentially. It is a claim. So I pull the tenant out. Yeah. So what I've done is I've said, okay, when I register a new tenant, so if I register um, in my metadata on the server, if I register multiple tenants with my email, it will actually create a list of the available tenants GUIDs in my user metadata, and it will set the last one I create as my app metadata tenant. So that gets passed down, and that's what I pull out here. And then everything else gets forwarded that way, which is kind of why I've been doing this massive refactoring, is because I really didn't want to break that behavior, and this I disliked very much. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I'm doing that. And the intention is, what you'll do is when you go to log in, if you have multiple tenants, it will ask you which one do you want. What do you need to pass it on? Right now, I've basically created this. So my intention would be I'd pass, because I don't really pass user beyond the API. So at this point, everything is just kind of passing. I'm just doing that right this second. But I think it's something that I don't know if I need. It's kind of one of the questions, right? Do permissions now make it into the application? I think they do at some point. So I think, yes, I would have to have some sort of middleware in there eventually to inject that in somehow. So right this second, I'm just passing them around as this, but eventually I think what I'd like to do is kind of decorate the commands with who did them and be able to authenticate there, because again, permissions and stuff, I'm not sure where they live. I was thinking you could set it in the context, and so that you can pass it, access it through a service and not to pass it around. Yeah, it's this is a challenge, and I think that one I'll come up against later on when I start to talk about who can do what, because is everything. Do you just guard at the API level, or do you guard at the in the domain? Is it, is the domain also saying, hey, this user can do this? Your middleware would set the context and you just use it. Yeah. But the application and stuff is agnostic, right term? Maybe, of HTTP, right? So realistically, these two pieces of information, all the information I technically need, to make any decisions off. Yeah, that's something I will definitely get into in much more depth later. I'm going to do this. This is not. Yeah. So we'll have to figure it out. We'll have to figure out what how I structure it, and that's kind of the purpose, right? As always. But the goal here is definitely one to stay on track and keep working towards this end goal. So, or working towards a product. Tenant, created tenant. I don't like doing this. This is nasty. Right. Info created tenant equals info.get .arg tenant. But still, you can be setting a service so it's not passed around so much. Yeah, I could actually inject an identity service of some form, right? I could use the middleware to populate that identity service. I think I've done it that way before, so that I know who's making a request, and that would be a scoped service that would be handled. Yeah, thinking about it, yeah, probably would do it that way, right? Create the middleware would pull the headers out, load up the user and the tenant, and then inject them as a service. Okay. So, created tenant dot tenant addresses dot count should assert dot equal 1. Okay, that works. Last time I was listening to you work on Couchbase, I know it doesn't have any query filters like EF, but that is a nice way to make it so the DB context is tenant aware and your repos could in theory be simple so they don't pass the tenant around. Yeah, Couchbase is something we're going to revisit. I did enjoy working with Couchbase. I think it's definitely something I want to use. Lou and Nelson, by the way, thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. But I had to remove it right now just to be pragmatic about moving forward with the project into the new year. So we will revisit Couchbase for certain. Hopefully, I can get Matthew Grove's time in the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months, and see. And talking about identity and stuff, I'm hopefully going to get Corey Weathers, who streams. He works for Auth0. Hopefully get him maybe on a stream and go through identity and all those pieces and, kind of review what I'm doing. So we actually did have Matthew Groves kind of hanging out in one stream and was able to answer a lot of questions. We did make a lot of progress. There's just some APIs in the Couchbase stuff that made it extremely difficult to kind of move forward with that and make it effective. So I've branched the code, right? I still have the ticket stuff, but we just swapped it out to SQL Server temporarily. So yeah, my goal is to maybe have some guests on the stream in the next couple of months that actually do work with these tools and be able to say, you're doing that wrong, that's horrendous, or oh yeah, that's the right way to do it, and kind of help validate for for all of us. Okay, so I've got to finish this up because I'm going to be late for work. Man, I want to have identity with the client password flow that's also tenant aware. So like tenant could create an app that only works for a particular tenant, but can't find a lib that does that. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so they all failed for the same reason. And it's the bad reason, right? So the problem was, right, and I identified it pretty much the moment I realized, is this. So you remember I went to try and set the tenant addresses in here. I don't think I can do that either. Can I create an instance? Yeah. The ones I found can do tenant on the user side, not the app side. Huh. So you'd restrict the application based upon. Huh. Yeah, I guess I'm going to go into a whole world of hurt. Once I get into what users can actually do in the system. I mean, I've kind of got some permission stuff in there. I don't feel permissions and roles kind of, yeah. Right now I'm using, I've got some permission stuff in place and it kind of works, but yeah, because I kind of implemented it as like policies. I kind of statically created everything to define it in one place, but this feels really nasty. So I put all my identity stuff in an extensions library. Created permissions just to map to the actual permissions from Auth0 that defined, and obviously that now needs to change with everything else, and the policies kind of wrap them up. So I can define a policy as having permissions, etc. within here, but this feels really janky, and actually don't want this global. I want this per application, per grouping, because these policies only matter at this level. So yeah. Okay, that's water, drink water, that's bad. Okay, so let's run that test, and then I do have to, unfortunately, finish up. I think this is going to fail, but it should fail for the right reason now, right? Address is created. We did create an address. Associate object reference not set to instance of an object. Tenant is created. Huh, interesting. It's that line still. Remember, with OpenID, you can have the client credentials that as app level versus resource owner or auth code that is more of a user thing. The client credentials that is app level versus. Oh wow, so much to get into. I just want to do one thing. Okay. Yeah, maybe we'll get to look at some of that stuff. Okay, so there is that. This is configured, and the address does not have an ID. Remember, that won't matter. Why would that matter? And there is a domain event on the address. Address created. There we go. Add domain event. Yeah. Okay. Client refers to an app in OpenID. Huh. Yeah. That's my newest Uber Eats app. Nice. Yeah, maybe we can as I start to grow into this, because very soon I'm going to need different sorts of permissions and stuff, and different types of users. I got a feeling I'm going to flex that a lot, the Auth0 stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what challenges I come up against. You know, because you're coming up against different set of challenges because of how your apps are built. But yeah. But anyway, it's 9:14. I'm about to be very late to work. I've let this overrun way too long. Thank you for joining me today. I do appreciate for everyone hanging out. I do have a Discord. You're more than welcome to join. Continue conversation from the stream, catch up with other things. And again, I do put all the videos up on YouTube. Please go, do the like, share, subscribe thing on YouTube. Comments if there's things that you feel that I could do differently, if there's things you want to you want to see, please just drop some comments on those videos and let me know, and I'll see what I can do. So I'm going to finish this up hopefully today, clean this up and get it working. A lot of progress has been made, and Junicus, thank you for stopping by. Good to see you again. Happy New Year. Thank you very much. And Essa, again, thank you for all your contributions. Thank you for the links. Thank you for the code. You've really helped guide me in a positive direction here, and I feel that the application is better because of that guidance. So I truly do appreciate all your efforts and your support. So thank you. Okay, let's go raid. We're going to raid Apex because Apex is doing game dev. He's doing some very cool stuff with behavior trees. He's been working really hard on this for the last couple of weeks, and he's finally got this behavior tree implementation in a really good place. So please drop him some support if you can. I will be back tomorrow morning, where I will resume some more of this, and maybe we'll start talking about that extra application we can do to work together on. So again, thank you. Take care all. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.